Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. Today we unravel a story of mystery and discovery, one that begins with a routine mission, but spirals into an adventure far beyond imagination. Picture this: a remote mountain, an abandoned plane hidden for decades, and a researcher who stumbles upon a secret no one was ever meant to find. What lies buried in the snow? And who is pulling the strings behind the scenes? Stay with us as we journey into the unknown, uncovering a tale that will leave you questioning everything. A lost plane found after decades, researchers are stunned when they see what's inside. Philip struggled to get up on the mountain. He had been tasked to plant a satellite device on top of the mountain, but got a lot more than he bargained for. When reaching the top, he stares right at an abandoned plane. He realizes that this had to be here for decades. How could something so big go unnoticed for so long? He had to know what this plane was hiding inside. Philip struggled with the decision if he should enter all by himself or not. He did not see a safe way inside of the plane. If he would get hurt, no one would notice that he was gone. The temperatures were dropping fast, and Philip couldn't feel his hands anymore from the cold. He had to get help. This was too big for Philip to research on his own, so he signaled two of his colleagues with a flare gun, and they flew over by helicopter immediately. No one had ever seen anything like this before, and together they decided to try and get inside the plane, but no one was prepared for what they were about to see. Philip was the first person who stepped inside the plane. His mouth fell open instantly. But how is it possible that no one knew about this? Philip and his colleagues looked at each other in disbelief. This will make them famous. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. The answer would soon be revealed, but this reminded Philip of when he received an anonymous cryptic letter at home a couple of days ago. Without notice, he was called to the research station before discovering the plane. Was this connected somehow? He had left behind all his friends and family for this mysterious project and traveled to an unknown country. Someone from the town had sent him that letter for a reason. He was the chosen one, as he would describe it, and he was determined to turn over every stone for this project. It had been a long time since Philip felt this motivated for a project. There was a lot about this project that interested him. He wondered why this person had chosen him in particular and how he or she got his address. But Philip could have never expected his trip to end like this. He arrived at the town a few days after he had received the letter. It was a very old and empty town. There was only one supermarket, and the streets looked deserted. Philip started his research by knocking on doors and asking people about the legend, but the people did not receive him with open arms. He had knocked on almost every door when he saw an old man walking the streets. Philip ran toward the man and asked if he could tell him something about the urban legend. The man hesitated, but then said to Philip, "Come to the old horse in an hour." Philip agreed without knowing what the old horse was. It turned out that the old horse was a little cafe in the center of the town. When Philip entered the cafe, he saw the man had already arrived. Philip sat across from the man and put his notebook on the table. The man stayed silent for a while, but then he started talking. The legend goes as follows. There once was a plane with the number 66 that was supposed to fly to Japan. No one knew who was on the plane or what it was carrying, and as soon as the plane took off, it went off the radar. Some say there was a horrible storm, but scientists debated that theory. To this day, no one knows what happened to that plane. Philip looked at the man in disbelief. The man, in turn, looked at him stoically. He wanted to ask more questions, but the man got up and walked out of the cafe. The only thing that Philip could do now was go on his own search. First, he had to figure out what route the plane could have flown and follow that route. But how does he figure this out? Then suddenly, he gets an idea. The local airport employees needed to know something about the plane's disappearance. So he started at the Alaskan airport. When Philip came home from the airport, he saw a little note attached to his door. He wondered who it could be from, but there was no name or stamp on the note, so it had to be delivered personally. He removed the letter from the door and sat down at the kitchen table. Philip opened the note and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from the same person as the anonymous letter, but this time there was only one sentence. Philip reread the sentence 3 times so that he could fully absorb it. Go to the right side of town and walk along the mountain path. Find Theo. Philip wondered who this person was who kept sending him notes and letters, and who was this Theo? Philip packed his backpack and started his journey through the deserted town. The village looked like a ghost town. No light shone in the houses, and no one else was on the streets. When he reached the mountain path, he noticed something strange. There was a sign that said, "Restricted area, no trespassing." But this didn't scare Philip, and he started walking. It was a difficult path because there were a lot of loose stones and frozen puddles, but he managed to make it to his first destination. He saw a little cottage in the distance. That must be Theo, he thought. A storm was heading toward him, so he had to reach the cottage just in time. He banged on the door as the wind started to pick up. He had to figure out a way to get inside, or he would never be able to continue his search tomorrow. Then something unexpected happened. The door flipped open, and Philip stood face to face with a silhouette of a little man. "Theo?" he asked. The man stepped aside. He didn't say a word to Philip, which was strange. It felt like he was expecting him. The man pointed to a bed, but there was something else. On top of the bed was another note. Philip felt like he was on a scavenger hunt. If this person knew where the plane was, why didn't they go to it themselves? The note contained coordinates. Philip, fortunately, was good at reading coordinates, so he knew roughly which way to go. Philip knew the plane had to be where the coordinates led him, so the following day he continued his search optimistically, but he would have never seen this coming. Philip walked and walked until his legs started to get sore. He was almost at the top of the mountain, and there was still no sign of the plane anywhere. Could this person be playing with him? But then he saw something he couldn't explain. Philip looked to his left and saw something sticking out of another mountain. It didn't look like something out of nature. He squinted his eyes and suddenly recognized a wing. That must be the plane, Philip thought. But the plane was at least another day's walk from where he was standing, and there was something else. There was no path leading toward the plane. Philip had to go off-road to reach it, and there was a deep layer of snow. He couldn't see what was underneath the snow, so he had to be very careful. He shuffled his feet over the ground to feel the rocks and made his way over to the plane. Philip was only halfway there when the sun started to set. He had a little flat spot of ground in sight where he could set up his tent, but he had to reach it quickly. He made it just in time and set up his tent, but the wind started to pick up. Philip got in his sleeping bag and tried to stay warm, but it wasn't so easy. He woke up the next morning with frozen hands and icicles in his beard. Luckily for him, the sun was shining, so he stood outside for a little bit to warm up. When he was a bit warmer, he put everything away and continued his journey. He was so close now. When Philip finally reached the plane, he couldn't believe his eyes. It was almost entirely buried under the snow, except for the one wing he saw. He mapped where the plane was and journeyed back to Theo's cabin. There, he would call for backup. Philip called 2 of his best friends who were also researchers, Lincoln and Greg. They had no idea that Philip was all the way in Alaska, but didn't doubt him when he asked them to come too. They knew there had to be something extraordinary for Philip to fly over there, but they never expected it to be this. Lincoln and Greg arrived 3 days later, and they all set up their things in Theo's cabin. It was the closest place to the plane with internet and power for their equipment. Philip led the way toward the plane, and his friends followed him blindly. They were stunned when they saw what Philip was doing there. They spent the first few days digging the plane out of the snow. Somehow, the plane was still mainly intact after the crash. The only things that were broken off were one side wing and the back tail of the plane, but there were no holes in the side. They had to figure out another way to get inside the plane. Philip tried to look inside the plane through the windows, but there was something in front of them. They were taped shut with black tape. There must be something or someone very important inside for them to tape everything shut, Philip thought. He wasn't far off. So Lincoln suggested that they drill a hole in one of the plane's doors. That way they could get inside. But Philip was more interested in something else he saw sticking out of the tail of the plane. It was a little orange device. He had found the black box of the plane. This was something very serious because this box held the reason why the plane crashed so many years ago. Philip took the box back to the cabin and screwed it open, only to find something very strange inside. There should be a big memory card of some sort inside the box. But there was nothing. The slot where the card should be was empty, and Philip didn't understand why. Did someone take it out, or was it never even there in the first place? This case was getting more mysterious by the minute. Philip suddenly remembered the anonymous letters he had received. What if this person had taken out the memory card, and they only needed Philip to open up the plane so they could swoop in and steal everything that hid inside? He shook his head and told himself to get it together, but the thought stayed in the back of his mind. Philip had never told Lincoln and Greg about the anonymous letters, and he didn't intend to do so until one of them asked about it. They wondered how Philip knew about this plane and why no one from the authority was helping him. When he explained what had happened, Lincoln and Greg reacted differently than he expected. They got scared when they discovered what was happening and suddenly didn't want to continue their work. So Philip reminded them about the thrill and adventure they were having. What was the worst thing that could happen? Philip asked them. But he didn't know then what he knows now. Philip convinced them to continue the research, so they started drilling the next day. Eventually, the hole was big enough, and Philip stepped inside the plane. He ripped the tape from the first few windows. The natural light beamed over the inside of the plane, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The plane was filled with crates, but that wasn't the only thing. He saw something in the corner of the plane glisten in the sunlight. Philip walked toward it and picked it up. It looked like a bullet, but it was all flattened by something. Philip's friends followed him inside and looked around with open mouths. They were too stunned to speak. Philip showed them the bullet, and they decided to check the cockpit together. They opened the door, expecting to see something horrible, but they were met with something they couldn't explain. The cockpit was empty. There were no bodies or other signs that there had been two people in there flying the plane. While Philip stayed in the cockpit to look around, Greg ran back to the cottage and grabbed a crowbar to open the crates. But when he opened the crates, he couldn't believe his eyes. He called for Philip and he rushed to Greg. Together, they unloaded the crates. Suddenly, they heard a helicopter flying over their heads. Not long after that, Lincoln ran inside and yelled that the police were coming, and it didn't look good. Philip could hear the sirens from afar, and the roars of the snow scooters came closer every minute. The police arrived within a few minutes and surrounded the plane. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg walked out of the plane with their hands up in the air. He was holding the anonymous letters in his hands and wanted the police to see them, but they didn't. They were taken to the police station and questioned one by one. Philip was the last one, and he could finally show the police officers the letters. They were confused as to why he had never called. He told the police that the crates were filled with bars of gold, and the black box was empty. They gave the police all the information he had, and they let him and his friends go. The police asked Philip if he wanted to assist them in the case, and he gladly accepted. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg helped the police with the case and got an honorary medal for finding the plane, but it wasn't finished yet. There was one more person that needed to be found, the anonymous tipper. The police promised Philip to find this person, but it turned out to be harder than they thought. Philip and his friends flew home, and they wrote a book about their adventure. The book became a bestseller, and everyone wondered about this anonymous tipper. But it turned out that this person was never found, and no one will ever know why they did what they did. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.